I'm John Collomosse. I'm a Professor of Artificial Intelligence at the University of Surrey and one of the co-investigators of the UKRI CoStar National Lab, which was responsible for the recent Time to Act report, which sets out some technical and policy recommendations for the Copyright and AI Challenge. And I'm also Director of Decade, the UKRI Centre for the Decentralised Digital Economy, which brings together researchers across the University of Surrey, Edinburgh and the Digital Catapult. And our work at Decade fed into the ACT report, looks at digital supply chains and how media provenance technologies can support consent and compensation in the creative sector in the age of generative AI.
We're interested in which stages of the generative AI life cycle, from data access through to outputs, raise the greatest practical challenges for rights holders seeking control and remuneration, and obviously for developers seeking access to content. Professor Collomosse.
Thank you. So data is accessed at several stages in the AI life cycle, during the large foundation model training, during model fine-tuning, and also at runtime sometimes when a model might retrieve additional data to help answer a query. And at all of these stages, the challenge for rights holders is really the same. How can they meaningfully control whether their work's used, under what terms, and gain an opportunity to share in the value created by the model output? So today we have standards and tools to deliver this control via kind of blanket opt-in and opt-out indicators, and this is a great start, but in the workshops we ran through the ACT project with creatives, it was very clear that creators wanted much more granular control, particularly the need to specify who may use which works, on what terms and for what purpose. In other words, essentially an asset level licensing system, and in ACT, which is an acronym, we summarise this as the 3 Cs, which is control, consent and compensation. So on the developer side, the challenge is of course getting access to sufficient scale of content at sufficient quality and knowing where it's come from, so it's provenance. And provenance matters because synthetic or low quality data can harm training, and because without a clear chain of custody it is difficult to handle content in a rights respecting way. So obviously this has driven developers to license, make deals with large collections of content. It's an opportunity that's being mirrored by some of the policy initiatives around the Creative Content Exchange to derive value from large cultural heritage collections. But the challenge there is that the creative sector is inherently decentralised. More than half the global creative GVA is from small businesses and freelancers that don't really have practical, low-friction ways to license content at scale. So my evidence today is really that attaching provenance signals to assets can help address the challenges on both sides. They can give creators better agency and give developers scalable access to content that they need, but in a rights-preserving way. Thank you. Yes, I'd love to come in on that because I think there's been a lot of discussion now about site-based methods, and they're an important part of the puzzle. Essentially, they're an access control mechanism, a voluntary access control mechanism. And of course, if a creator uploads their work to a platform, but then it gets reposted, reshared elsewhere on the internet, that is not going to be the preferences attached to that content aren't going to move with it, and that's why we need asset-level controls to complement the site-level signals. The sort of barriers that would exist around this are actually more around larger platforms honouring and retaining these signals as they move around through the content supply chain. But again, these signals, provenance signals that are expressed through data that moves around inside the asset, what we call the metadata or supplementary data that moves in the asset, that can be reinforced or made sticky to assets through things like watermarking, where you inject an identifier inside an asset like an image that's invisible but lets you re-identify the content to look up and recover that metadata if it's stripped away. There's a similar technology, fingerprinting. All of these things come together, these 3 technologies, we call them the 3 pillars, that make this a practical technology for adoption.
But essentially, you think the obligation or the decision to actually watermark or whatever should be with the creative rather than the onus being with the person, the AI company that's using it?
Well, what we've heard in our workshops is that creators want granular control. So they want to be able to state, you can use my content for this purpose and on these terms, and actually I'd quite like to be paid for that content use as well. So taking the active step to issue those rights and licenses on your content and make them durable so that when they pass into the content supply chain, they can then be hopefully respected by, for example, model trainers, AI developers, is the approach that we would advocate for.
Can I ask what kinds of licensing, remuneration and market infrastructure can facilitate access to creative works for AI development in the UK whilst ensuring value flows to those rights holders? And if I start with Professor Collomosse, please.
Absolutely. Well, as I say, I think that the best way to view the AI and copyright problem is as a supply chain problem. Provenance standards like CTPA are a way of increasing transparency in the content supply chain. You know, just like you might want to know how your sausage is made in the supermarket, you know, your food provenance, you'd also like to know, for example, which model made an AI image, which data sets or collections an AI model has been trained on. So provenance data in model inputs, it already opens the possibility of potential revenue sharing models at the collection or the data set level for cases where a model also answers a question by pulling in specific documents or articles, like say from a newspaper publisher. You know, provenance can show which sources were accessed to answer that query. There could be revenue share agreements made on that data access as well. So I see provenance as being essentially an infrastructure that can be built on. As I was previously explaining, it's essentially an open standard, something like CTPA, that is supported by various technologies to make it sticky, durable to assets. And then once you've established the provenance of an asset, you can start talking about its ownership, as well as its authenticity, actually, which is another great use case for that technology. And then, of course, start talking about defining, using other open standards layered on top, rights and licensing mechanisms. So I see that stack as being a technical stack that is highly applicable to this challenge of copyright and AI.
Thank you.
4 areas, really, that government and regulators can help. So first of all, endorsing open standards. As I say, I think they're a big part of the solution. Signals that are open, using technology that is free, interoperable to declare the provenance of assets and track their rights through the content ecosystem. I don't think the government should name any particular standard in legislation. I think that's dangerous and it would go out of date very quickly. But I think there could be a role for regulators to give guidance on best practice in industry at any given time. I think the government could help by encouraging durability and respect for these signals that I've mentioned. So content platforms to preserve them, also talking about maybe encouraging through some sort of kite mark scheme respect for these signals and recognition when developers have followed these signals. I think some really interesting work being done around this creative content exchange idea in terms of creating a platform for licensing content. I think if that were done through open standards, again, this is sort of leading by example, really, then what we would see is that as a blueprint that could shift from large collection owners to the decentralized creative economy, which, as I say, is the majority of the creative economy, and then could be used as a vehicle for small and medium enterprises and freelancers to license their content if done through these sorts of frameworks.
How optimistic or otherwise are you about being able to sort this out? Because I think a couple of you or your organisations might be involved in the technical working groups that the government is running. So perhaps it would just be helpful if you could tell us that. How do you feel about this? Is it something that if we grapple with it, we can get to a place where we can, help with the remuneration and certainly support the move forward with AI? Professor Collomosse.
I'm very optimistic, and I think the way to realise that optimism is by moving the argument on from the kind of polarised opt-in, opt-out debate to a place where we recognise that creators, as we've heard, want this granular control over who can use content for what purpose, under what terms, and ultimately remuneration models can be established around that. I think this is not a question of opt-in or opt-out. Actually, both technologies, for robots or text for access control and granular licensing technologies, both have a place. And I think if we recognise that there's a landscape of solutions and work with industry and open standards bodies to develop those solutions and incentivise developers to adopt those solutions, then I would be very optimistic that we can find ourselves in a better place.